Yeah, so I personally am Chinese descendant, half Taiwanese, half Cantonese. I was born in Japan, but I never met my father, who's Cantonese. So I grew up with a lot of Japanese culture and some awareness of the Taiwanese culture. The legacies that I grew up with was basically whatever my mom told me. Like you're supposed to be Chinese, supposed to act a certain way. And when we came to the States, I think I was 9 years old. She basically said, "Don't be like, don't adopt the ways of the Western culture because X, Y, and Z was not, you know, is not in line with the way we think or our philosophy. So therefore, you should not act that particular way." In the meantime, I was developing my identity as a Western person. So it's kind of a weird displacement. Like I didn't know where I belonged, and that's kind of prevalent in my artwork too. There's some Godzillas in my images, and Godzilla's kind of like my stand-in, feeling lost and just kind of observing all the things that's kind of happening around me. So yeah, that's the kind of a weird metaphor, I suppose you could say. Um, yeah, but I use Godzilla because it's also the culture I grew up in Japan. I was watching reruns of, Japanese monster movies as a kid, and my mom had a nighttime job, so my Godzilla movies were my babysitter, I suppose. So yeah, my culture comes out in ways that's in my art, in the images I depict, in the way I eat food, or in the way I interact with people. It's very interesting. Right. So I guess if I were to say what my motherland or culture is, would be Japan, because that's where I was born. That's where I was raised in the first 9 years of my life. That's where I learned language and culture and how I interact with people, which still comes out as an adult today. So I'm fairly reserved and pretty shy, except when I'm around people that I'm comfortable with, right? So I sometimes have a very difficult time expressing myself verbally, or asking for the things I want, where and this might be more like a whole separate issue, but that I think that I developed codependency because of it. And so with the art, that gave me the language for me to express myself in ways that I couldn't personally, physically, right? And so if somebody were to dig deeper into my artwork, and they can kind of see what I'm trying to say or who I am more in a more personal, deeper level. Um, but having come to the U.S. as a kid, at 9 years old, and learning my culture through a Western perspective, through an Asian American perspective, and learning what my Chinese heritage is through Chinatown in San Francisco, for one, or which is a major part of how I learn about my quote unquote Chinese culture, but it's not really Chinese culture, it's Chinese American culture, right? So it's not, it's kind of a weird hybrid of things, right? And eventually, through that growth process, I kind of lost touch with my Japanese culture, and I became more Western or American. You might want to call it. So I keep calling myself this hyphen of in being between Chinese, Japanese, American. So I'm that hyphen in between. Um, because yeah, I'm still a mix of all of those things, and I'm also none of those things. If that even makes sense, right? Um, yeah. So my understanding of my own culture is through uh, absorbing what I think is my culture, as an Asian American, watching other Asian American, shopping at grocery stores and eating Asian American foods. And sometimes that means, eating Chinese American dishes like, oh gosh, what's the dish in Springfield, Missouri? Cashew chicken. Yeah, the place where cashew chicken was born, Springfield, Missouri, right? And how that's so different from the Chinese food that you would eat in San Francisco or New York City, for that instance. And that is its own culture. I'm realizing there's pockets of Asian American culture that's different from everywhere else in America. So I don't know where I am because I'm between all those things, right? So that's how confusing it is for me. Yeah, I think growing up, I was just like a lot of other kids. I was watching a lot of anime, right? So there's a lot of bright colors, graphic lines that has a huge influence in the way I looked at art. But in art school, or when I went to undergrad or community college for that matter, I was learning how to be a photorealist painter or whatever, and or drawer. So I was learning these basic foundational techniques But then, when I was coming out of college, I was thinking, what is my style? What am I trying to say? Who am I? So again, that was a part of a as part of the growth process as an adult, there's rejection of my old culture, and then there's like reacceptance of that culture, and then how that translates into my work. So as I was trying to rediscover my culture, I went back to Japan, I think back in 2006, to visit. And it was interesting because my motherland is no longer my motherland. I saw it as like a foreign land. I saw things that were familiar. I knew where my old home was. I knew how to go home, but I was seen as a foreigner. I acted like a foreigner. I saw the country as a foreigner. So, yeah, again, that puts me in a whole in between place of that hyphen again, right? So, with that said, I was absorbing as much of the culture as I can from this outside perspective. So, things like uh, architecture, food, pop cultural icons, or whatever. What are some things that resonate as a kid that I can bring into my art? What are some things that resonate with my Chinese American culture that I can bring into my art? So yeah, looking at those things and looking at art history in general, and just kind of strategizing like what are some of the great artists in the past who have made work? How did they use composition? How did they tell those stories? How can I borrow some of those ideas to incorporate those other things, my personal culture, my personal story, my personal life experiences, and then bring them all together? So that was my question, and yeah, it came in the form of, again, one is Godzilla, and second is very bright colors and very graphic lines. But still using paint as my medium because that was the way I was trained. I like to think I'm pretty strong as a 2D artist. So yeah, that's kind of how it formed. Is to find a community that accepts me for who I am and what I do. Yeah, right now that comes in the form of axe throwing community. Um, Yeah. So I've been, I don't want to say I'm a pro, but I've been throwing axes competitively for the past 4 years. So I'm going to the World Championships next month. So I'm very serious with my craft. And so I think having a group of people, for me, regardless of their background, that is willing to accept me for my work, my love, my willing to be social in my very limited context anyway, and be accepted as that. That is what belonging feels like to me. And I hoping that I can provide the same for them, which I think I do sometimes. But yeah, that's a hard thing. Like our world itself is a community, but it's also a very harsh community. And it's also a very judgmental community. Even being Asian American, that's also an incredibly judgmental community. Much love to my other fellow Asian Americans, but yeah. And I learned that again from family traditions, right? Like, don't hang out with the Vietnamese people, or don't hang out with the Korean people, or don't hang out with the Japanese people. I'm like, dude, what am I supposed to be doing? Now, that's the kind of stuff I had to learn from my, parent, and it was a tough thing because I didn't know what I'm supposed to do as an Asian American. I just want to be me. I just want to be accepted. I just want to be loved for who I am, right? So that is an ongoing theme because obviously as a young person that had so much impact, right? And that I think again this it goes back in the whole idea of codependency where I keep giving out the things I want from other people. So I try to love people the way I want to be loved. Well, I mean, it goes back to the last question of belonging, right? Yeah, just being part of something bigger than myself so that I'm not isolating and I'm not lost in my own head. And I've seen that happen to people who isolate themselves a lot. For me, it's important to be with the people that I feel safe with, that I feel comfortable with, that I feel like I belong to, that I feel like I can contribute to just as much as anything. So, I didn't necessarily find that sense of belonging with my Asian American community because in middle of Omaha, Nebraska, there isn't much. But because I'm so westernized, certain like more fresh off the boat Asian Americans expect you to act in more traditional ways, and I'm not that anymore. Um, and that kind of relationship can be very hard and strained. And yeah, um, or even in our community, where again it's all about competition and being judgmental. And sure, external community is about competition in the end, but at the same time, it is about support too. Like we cheer on our competitors, like to throw their absolute best, and that's the kind of love that I want to be surrounded by, right? Whether I do great that day or not, I want to be able to support them to be as successful as possible because they're all family. And we all call each other X fam for that reason. So that helps a lot. About a year and a half ago, my wife had left me, and that was made a huge impact. It was in the middle of COVID, and she wanted to buy a house, and I told her I wasn't ready. That I wanted to wait until I got my secure position in my job. That I more want to be more financially stable. And she left and bought a house. Now she's in a relationship, right? So that in itself is its own thing. But for me, I had to kind of figure out, well, what is home for me? I was in an apartment complex until last month, and just paying a cheap rent, and I was fine with that. But I was living like a college kid still in my advanced age, and it was that little like isolation and comfort that I found in that little space, realizing that maybe it was holding me back. Yeah, then living in a house and buying a house, yeah, it's more expensive, but I get to create a space now. I get to find out what I want to do. Like my whole every room is now like kind of like my canvas, right? Because I get to decorate them in the way I want. Right now, I'm just choosing to surround myself with art of my friends or natural Portland or San Francisco, which you can't see. But yeah, just honoring the people in my past, honoring my past and where I've lived, and just kind of figuring out this is my safe space, this is my creative space, and I want to welcome people to it. I decorate each room. I have three guest rooms in this house, and like I want people to come over. I want to be part of something bigger. I don't want to be isolated. I don't you know I want to be, friends with all my neighbors. So I want to go to movies, which I did, which is great. It was really great experience to be getting to know your neighbors, right? Um, yeah. So just something. Home is bigger than where this space, but my, home is connection with other people, at least for me. So this is a base to establish that connection. I guess with the art community, teaching art helps. Teaching young artists, like college kids who are wanting to become artists, that's definitely keeping me mentally young, I guess, if that makes sense. Obviously, going to external venues and then connecting with other X stores, or I actually travel almost every other weekend to go to external tournaments, so that helps me see my extended X family pretty often, which is great. But yeah, in my artistic practice, I think I was so traumatized by my ex-wife leaving, and then having feelings for somebody else, and then have her pretty much kind of said, "No, this isn't going to happen," and I kind of have abandonment issues after that. So I'm trying to find my creative space again, which is I think part of the reason why I needed this house, so I can find that safe space to make art again. So that's been kind of tough because I got again I didn't realize just how important connections were for me because I grew up as this Asian American kid in the Bay Area, acting like I had no emotions and I could do without anybody. But I need people in my life. I want people in my life, and that's tough sometimes. The anti-Asian hate isn't really coming through in my artwork necessarily. Because I think partly because of where I am, because I live in Nebraska, and the Asians are very much a minority here. I don't really see many Asians, so yeah, the Asian American anti-Asian, hate or violence against them. Most I've seen are in larger cities, right? Like LA, in San Francisco, New York, and things like that. And I don't see that as much in the Midwest because I haven't been in the area or exposed myself enough to experience too much of that. It's not to say I didn't experience racism, but the racism I went through are mostly accidental racism, which doesn't make much sense. Like somebody try to give me compliment in ways that's like totally racist, right? It's like say one experience I had was I walked into McDonald's. There's this young kid, very excitable, very friendly. He's like, "Oh, hey, yeah, you teach at the university, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." Oh, so what do you teach? Math? No. What do you teach? Science? No. And so he kept guessing. I'm like, "No, I didn't teach any of that." What do you teach? Art. So yeah, it was kind of something like that, right? And then another instance, walked into a Goodyear to get a new tire, and the guy behind the counter was like, "Hey, I saw you on TV." I'm like, huh? Yeah, you're Iron Chef, right? Um, no, but thank you for trying to be friendly. So those type kind of accidental racism, right? Even more recently in Nebraska, I went to go pick up some noodles at a Chinese restaurant. This guy, I think, was picking up a DoorDash order or whatever. He comes in, he bows to me, and then he looks at the wall decor, bows to the wall decor, goes to the lady behind the counter who was white and bows to her. I'm like, what the what? Um, and then he kept doing it. So I'm like, hey, dude, that's not cool. That's kind of racist. And then he's like, no, I'm not racist. So we started having a conversation. It became a shouting match. And then he told me to go back where I came from. Like, oh yeah, now you're being racist. So anyway, showing and sharing some of my Asian culture heritage in the more subtle ways in my composition kind of helps negate some of that anti-Asian hate, I think, because it comes into a more accessible space. And with art, people come in willingly to look at art, right? It's not like they're forced to look at art. Luckily for me, no violence against me yet. And so far, in the communities that I've been in, have been accepting. But that's also with asterisk, because majority of people I'm surrounded by are very much reserved, conservative, and yeah, they don't necessarily agree with minority rights. So yeah, so in my art, the theme is usually about humanitarian issues, right? So with the disaster series, which you were describing, it's about capturing the horrific events that happened. That's so big, they impact so many different people and lives or whatever. Because I think that by depicting that, it shows that anybody and everybody are fragile to these kind of moments, and through that, maybe we can all connect on a very human, basic level. Um, but I think that with the bright colors, I want to draw people in first, and once they come closer to my paintings, they're like, "Oh, there's something more going on." They're forced to think about the issue, whether it forces them to actually act on the issue or not. That's really up to them. But I think it's mostly flattering if somebody can actually sit there and really absorb everything. I think again, think about those things. And yeah, I've had some nice reactions where people have cried in front of my work. And I think for me, my art for me is a way to kind of talk about the hard things. And for me, it's also a way to process my trauma of witnessing these tragic events. But also, it's a bridge. It's a bridge for me to connect to not just the people depicted in the artwork, but the people viewing the artwork. So no matter how different we all are, it's a way to somehow relate to one another in a very basic human level. And in my travels, I think that there are three universal truths about everybody in the world, which is we all want to be heard, we want to be understood, and we all want to be accepted as we are. So that's what I'm trying to do whenever I'm creating something, to make that connection. That's really hard to answer because I don't know where my art is going. For a while, I thought I was just gonna continue the series of I'm gonna travel, I'm gonna collect people's stories, and I'm gonna retell the stories which I think people don't hear about or see very often, and see if we can find that thread about the human commonality again through my work. But again, with COVID, it kind of threw everything upside down. So at the moment, it's this whole self rediscovery about who I am as an artist, as a person. So right now, whatever direction I was going back then, 2 years ago, it doesn't matter anymore. Right now, it's just me trying to find my footing again because art making has been really difficult. The past year, kind of being a creative adjacent by making axes, which I make beautiful axes. I'm pretty proud of those things. But at the same time, like, well, this doesn't say anything. It's just ornate and pretty. So what kind of thing, right? Like I feel like art has a purpose. Art has a meaning. It's not to be just somebody's decor on the wall, which kind of being hypocritical because I have art on the wall, but art has the opportunity to do something so much more, right? And not just necessarily in 2D art or visual art, but in any other creative outlet. There's again our way of building culture, our way of connecting with more people, and our way of like um, helping the future understand how important the process of creativity, art making is. Answer because I don't know. Honestly, I never really thought about it that way. And I don't think I worry about that too much when I'm making the work, right? I think when I'm making work, the most important thing for me is to be as honest as I can with what I feel like I'm experiencing, seeing, and feeling, and trying to translate that in a way that people can accept or understand. So as far as like the other stuff, I I don't think about it, and that might sound disappointing, but yeah, it's just I guess that's just what it is. Sure. I mean, it's like my works are all paintings, right? So they're not. I mean, I've done some screen prints in the past after the fact, but mostly I just was borrowing inspiration aesthetics from traditional Japanese block prints or anime or Chinese propaganda posters, whatever. I really like the bright block colors and some of the really strong lines that was depicted in the in old art. So I was borrowing some of that as I was, trying to figure out my process of how to depict my images. So it started out as just me working in watercolor, and then I made a switch about 12 years ago to gouache. And I don't know if you don't know what a gouache is. It's like watercolor, but the pigment's opaque, so it's not more vibrant in that way. So in the paintings that you see, it's usually about 3 to 4 layers of the same color on top of each other, so that the brushstrokes are mostly wiped out. So I try to hide my brushstrokes as much as I can. I use like a really tiny brush, which I think is like a 000. It's like very small, very fine, and it takes me forever to paint. But I like details, so yeah. As far as like building a composition, it's really about again figuring out the puzzles and then what pieces I think goes together. So when I think of a canvas, right, it's like a stage, right? You have your main actor, you got your supporting cast, then you got your props, and you got your backdrop. How do they all play with each other? How do they complement each other? Does everybody have a role? And if not, why is it in there? Kind of thing. So I'm trying to imagine a still from a movie. I'm trying to imagine like a movie poster, and we're just trying to imagine a key moment in a theatrical play. So that's how I try to create my compositions. It just comes down to pure intention and honesty, right? Like if your work is sincere, if you work really hard, that desire to connect, that desire to make something meaningful, that desire to be better than who I was the day before, that was really prevalent. And yeah, I think people will appreciate and accept and welcome anybody who can work that hard and that sincerely without any ulterior motives, right? Because some people want to be artists for fame or money or whatever. That doesn't always come. And I tell people I don't take commissions, I don't sell work because for me, it's about keeping my work together so I can have traveling exhibitions. And then communicating through the exhibition, be it an artist talk or talking to the community, doing a workshop or whatever, right? So I just came back from University of Northern Colorado, which is just an hour north of Denver, and then connecting with the students that way, sharing my process. This is how I made my work. This is how you can make your work. And again, preaching about having that integrity and sincerity in the way they process their creative projects. So